There has been yet another face-off between Indian and Chinese troops. This time, the incident has been reported in the Tawang sector of Arunachal Pradesh in the eastern part of India. Sources say on the 9th of December, PLA troops contacted the line of actual control in Tawang sector, which was contested by Indian troops in a firm and resolute manner. Sources say this face-off led to minor injuries to some personnel from both sides. The two sides immediately disengaged from the area. Sources also say as a follow-up of the incident, India's commander in the area held a flag meeting with his Chinese counterpart to discuss the issue in accordance with structured mechanisms to restore peace and tranquility in the sector. For more on this, we are now joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibul from New Delhi. Siddhant, reports suggest that soldiers have been injured on both sides. This is, of course, the first such incident between the People's Liberation Army of China and the Indian Army since the 2020 Galwan clashes. What more do we know at this point? How has the Indian government reacted?
Well, Neha, this is a concerning development that has emerged. The incident took place last week on 9th, and now the Indian sources have confirmed that the incident took place in which there were minor injuries to the troops of both sides. There was a flag meeting as well. And this is protocol in nature. Whenever such incident happen at the line of actual control, flag meetings do happen. But the development comes at a time when the relationship between India and China hasn't been doing very well. We know that how essentially there has been no conversation at the highest level, except, of course, that handshake in Bali. And of course, we also know that when it comes to India-China relationship, the Indian External Affairs Minister has several times said that relationship is not normal. The Indian Army Chief last month said that at the border, at the line of actual control, while the situation is stable, but it is unpredictable. Now, the Indian side has been saying because the border is not demarcated properly, these kinds of development do happen. But the trajectory of the relationship is worrisome, and we can also a certain way link to developments in China. There have been protests in China over the zero COVID policy, and many would see the Chinese government, Xi Jinping, trying to have some kind of diversion to make sure that the focus basically shifts to outside rather than inside the country.
Right, Siddhant, now just to put this into perspective for our viewers, the reason why this incident is very concerning, as you rightly pointed out, and will be viewed very, very seriously is because this is the first such incident since June 2020, when 20 Indian soldiers were killed and several others were injured in violent clashes with the PLA troops in Ladakh's Galwan Valley. Of course, Chinese soldiers had also been killed in those clashes. Coming back to you, Siddhant, do we have details at the moment of how many soldiers have been injured on either side? Do we know more about the nature of those injuries? And do we have a confirmation of whether there has, in fact, been a disengagement from both sides?
Well, answering all your questions on the disengagement part, as of now, the situation looks very stable. The soldiers have moved out. On the number of injuries, we do not know the injuries from the Chinese side, but from the Indian side, it is estimated that around 8 to 9 soldiers have been injured. And when it comes to the situation, as of now, it looks pretty stable. So the good news is that, of course, the situation has been stabilized. The bad news, of course, is that this development is coming. And also remember that, as you pointed out, this is the first such incident since the Galwan incident, but also first such incident that is being reported of a serious nature in Arunachal Pradesh, in Tawang. And we know what's the Chinese view on Tawang and Arunachal Pradesh. They see it as part of South Tibet.
All right. Now, going by some of the media reports that are emerging at this moment, Siddharth, of course, you mentioned there that at least 8 to 9 Indian soldiers may have been injured. We don't really know at the moment how many were injured on the Chinese side. The Indian defense officials are being quoted as saying that there were more injuries on the Chinese side. The question really is, what happens next? Now, we know, Siddharth, that the border dispute between the two countries has been an ongoing one for decades now. However, things have been particularly tense along the line of actual control since those Galwan clashes of June 2020. And there have been claims and counterclaims by the two sides on that issue. Considering the seriousness and the gravity of the situation, what happens next? You talk about how flag marches have been held, but the bigger question really is, are we going to see the two sides sit down and talk about what happened in Tawang this time on the 9th of December? What are you picking up from your sources?
Well, what has happened in this case is the usual protocol. They're having the commanders meeting, which has happened, and the situation looks stable now. When it comes to what has happened in Galwan, since Galwan, there have been multiple rounds of diplomatic and military talks. In fact, 16 rounds have taken place and more rounds are expected when it comes to these kinds of conversation. While it is of serious nature, it has happened in Arunachal Pradesh. Indian side has confirmed there have been injuries. It doesn't look like that it is as serious as Galwan, but it shows the trajectory of the relationship, how the relationship has been going. And as the Indian External Affairs Minister has multiple times emphasized that whatever happens at the border, at the line of actual control, will have ramifications in the relationship. In fact, since the Galwan incident, the Indian side has banned many Chinese apps, and they have been saying that their focus is to reduce trade dependency on China, while of course the trade has increased according to trade data, especially coming from the Chinese side. The Indian side is focusing on making sure that there is decoupling when it comes to trade, when it comes to investment from China. There is some more scrutiny on Chinese investment, and that is the measure taken by the Indian side. But also remember one thing, that India is going to hold the G20 summit, and China is the member of the groupings. We do expect the Chinese President Xi Jinping to visit India, in fact New Delhi, next September to take part in the summit. And this is a kind of a very fragile situation, because at one point you have a border situation, a very tense border situation, and at another point you're hosting this mega diplomatic event where, of course, absence of even one leader will be seen as not very positive development. India, of course, is keen on a very successful G20 summit, and the Chinese side has also extended their presidency, their support to the presidency of India. So, very fragile situation. India and China both would not like to see any kind of dramatic development at the border as of now, but you never know what happens at the border. And of course, whatever happens at the border will have ramifications in the relationship.
Exactly, Siddhant. In fact, the last time the leaders of the two countries came face to face at a global forum just a few weeks ago, many observers felt that it was a rather frosty exchange between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The warmth of the past seemed to be missing. Given what's happened now in the Tawang sector, and given how seriously it's going to be viewed through the prism of Galwan, where so many soldiers lost their lives, would it be safe to say that this incident is likely to perhaps create more frostiness in an already fraught India-China relationship?
Well, India-China relationship has been seen as going back a decade, primarily because of the Galwan incident, and even any minor injuries is something that is going to have impacts. I do believe tomorrow morning the Indian newspapers here in Delhi are going to headline this development, and of course its implications on the relationship. But remember how both sides are keen on some kind of engagement at a level which is, of course, not at the leadership level, but making sure that at practical level at the border, the relationship can continue. Both sides will be eager that there are no injuries, or, of course, the troops of both sides not being impacted. But when it comes to a border which is not demarcated, you see such kind of developments, and Arunachal stands example of that. But we know that the Chinese side have been very aggressive, and it's just not with the border here with India, but also when it comes to South China Sea, situation in Taiwan. Almost all the borders when it comes to China have been facing some kind of issues, even with ASEAN as well. There have been troubles over South China Sea. So next year is not far away, but we know that the biggest worry in the mind of many of Chinese, the neighbors of China, is where China is heading towards. We saw the German foreign minister being in Delhi just last week, and she also, in response to a WION question, talked about how the Chinese have completely changed. They're not following the rules-based order. And here in New Delhi, there is, of course, resonance when it comes to how the Chinese have been essentially trying to remove the rules which have been set up. We know that India and the United States also recently conducted an exercise in Oli in Uttarakhand, and we saw a strong reaction coming from the Chinese side, which was, of course, rebutted by the Indian side. So such kind of diplomatically or military is something that is worrisome for the relationship.